Development on this game has been a very interesting process. It's been a very humbling process as well. So to go into that, so the idea for Prime Maximum Warrior came when I was watching streams um, of people doing speed runs of Final Fantasy One. That's a really old game on the like Nintendo Entertainment System. So like speed runs for it aren't like nearly as popular. But the game is about like, hey, assembling a party and then going off on this adventure and defeating chaos. But the speedrun strats are kill off all of your party except one character, then soup up that one character, and then take on chaos. And I was just like, that's kind of brilliant. Because even if you reduce the system down to just one character, it's still pretty interesting. In fact, more interesting, because now different levels of threat. So previously, like, oh, you cared about this enemy because it would go after your white mage, and your white mage would die, and that would be bad. But if all the damage is going to your warrior, you don't care. And suddenly the enemies that scare you are the ones that do status effect. And so from that idea, right, like came the idea of like, what if there was a game based on each one of the classes? What would their stories be like? What would their systems be like? And so that's what sort of Prime Maxima is sort of examining that.
I really enjoyed it, very much so. Played it already before back at Pixel Pop, enjoyed it then. I noticed that this time there was way more incentive to switch weapons, I think, though.
Yeah, and that was a development that Isaiah actually recommended, and I think works out pretty. So previously, weapons, you could sort of take a weapon and you could just sort of stick to just working within that weapon. And I wanted you to like try out different move sets. And so what Isaiah suggested is like decreasing the sort of versatility of the sword. So the sword is good from getting from middle stance to other stances, but it can't get out of other stances. So now you got to switch over to a weapon that's good at getting out of another stance. Yeah, we're still working on how to make that more intuitive, and also like rather than you click a button, go into a menu, switch out your weapon, then do that, rather like, hey, if I just put it on the bumpers or something. Yeah, that's probably what's going to be the next step. But that's sort of key to our whole combat system, is that we want you to play around with the different weapons. Some weapons are good at some combats than others. And then once the skill progression system is in, that's where it'll be like, oh, okay, now this weapon has a sort of dedicated role in this combat.
So, there's gonna be more games, each one based on each of the classes, right?
Yeah, and looking to examine sort of different kind of issues that are around the. So here with Warrior, we're looking at war as an economy, right? And that's not a new subject. A lot of games have covered that. But my hope is to sort of like see, because you're playing a mercenary, you're not like a noble or a knight or anything like that. You're here for hire to kill people, and it's to sort of examine, okay, what are the incentives for a person to kind of go and do that? Why do existing powers employ private military companies, right, in war zones, right? And sort of what is the sort of end game of these kinds of conflicts. So going a little bit deeper in, you probably noticed like terms like royalist and partisan being thrown around, right? That's because it's the conflict is based around like the English Civil War, which is a weird little like point in history. Nobody needs to really remember it. But what kind of caught me about that war is, one, it's not one that's covered frequently in video games. But two, it's such a insular conflict, right? Like it had to do with sort of like bringing down sort of the divine right of kings, right? But also, it's a war that played out over like a very small area, honestly, but had very far-reaching consequences. Anyway, history talk over. The point is, each game looks at that. So Monk is the one that Isaiah and I are working on next. That's going to be a little bit more open world. You're going to go wander around this area, learn kung fu, and fight zombies.
So it's basically Sekiro, right? And it's about equaling like graphics quality as well. Is that what I'm hearing?
No. For most of these, we'll stick to the sort of like 16-bit like aesthetic that. Well, so we say that, but like it's also difficult. So RPG Maker doesn't necessarily have the resources uh, for that. Like RPG Maker has its sort of own style as well. The problem with that style is that when people see that, they're like, "This is an RPG Maker game. I don't want to play it." Um, and so my hope is to make a couple of decent games, right? Sort of like within that, within that. So it won't be Sekiro levels, but it won't be Chrono Trigger levels either.
And the main character of this story is gay. Are you gonna keep kind of building on this sort of PC culture epidemic? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, so I remember talking to you about this. So I had a lot of doubts and trepidation about that, um, because the relationship between Orga and Zank, right? I am basing off an sort of existing relationship that I have. The more the dynamics of it rather than the specifics of it, right?
Mm.
Um, and in the initial builds, right, I wanted it to sort of be a question, right, whether the relationship was gay or not. Then I talked to you, right, and then like it just made from that conversation, it just made a whole lot more sense to me to just be sort of outright and explicit with it. Because the plan was for Orga to be gay. It's just a matter of like how explicit do we want to be. And one of the issues that media runs into when they kind of do this coyly, right, is that there are characters in fact. So we talked about Voltron a bunch, and I thought that was interesting because okay, like Shiro is a gay character, but the fact that he basically wasn't gay for 4 seasons, right? I feel sort of undermines that, right? And it allows the people that kind of deny our beliefs and our lifestyle ways to put us down, evidence sort of against us, right? So if you're outright and explicit with it, right? And I largely want like yeah, Orga is a flawed character, but he's largely a positive character, right? Not and absolutely not an edge lord. That is not the characterization we're going for with him, right? Like, sure, he's quippy, right? I'll give him that, right? But that's because his thing is like deflecting to humor, um, not sarcastic humor, but like ways to downplay the seriousness of the situation because he doesn't want to think about it. And so the key thing in the relationship between Orga and Zank is the fact that Zank wants to think about it and wants to be kind of serious about it, and Orga just wants to still play around. And so yeah, so sort of as we get into the story, it's gonna be about sort of unpacking that relationship, and so Orga has to sort of be explicitly gay right off the bat for us to be able to do that in any honest way. Yeah, so I mean, the interesting thing is that like so Monk, which is a game that is taking from like sort of wuxia traditions, right? Like the sort of like Chinese like wandering warrior stories, um, in Hong Kong action movies and things, is starring a black female character, and that's going to be a clash for a lot of people. And I want that clash because I want to sort of examine what that is, right, and kind of like dig in a little bit deeper to the extent that I can. I don't think I'm like the greatest writer, right? You saw the dialogue up there. It's not going to be winning any Oscars anytime soon. But yeah, the when you say like PC culture and SJW stuff, I know you mean it ironically, but to me, it's very important that games like this are out there and we sort of use them to examine this kind of stuff, right? In a way that like it's in a game, right? So the people that are offended by it, right? Like it's not in the direct reality, so they can see sort of how it works. One of the sort of ambitious things for PM Monk is I'm trying to depict a functioning anarcho-syndicalist society, um, and that's very political, right? That's being like, oh, what? Like people rejected capitalism and it works? How, right? And it's also about a group of people throwing off a colonialist empire, and then said colonialist empire sort of coming back and like bringing them down. So if Warrior is political in some sense. Monk is even more so, and there's no doubt Thief will be extremely so because Thief is about like income inequality and how class works. Not RPG classes, but like class and wealth structures.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's just going to be a part of my voice, right? As a developer, is that um, I don't get too many other outlets to talk about this kind of stuff. I think it's important, especially now, looking around the world. There are a lot of people that are um, under a ton of pressure because living is just is harder now for so many reasons.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason that protests are everywhere, and it's because the systems are not working. And so, in my small way, let's challenge those systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's take them apart. Let's figure out a better way. Um, but also, I am making a commercial product, right? Um, and that leads into like the fun, like, oh, like, you know, like, hey, is art developed for marketing still art, right? And like all kinds of fun questions like that. Yeah, I think that like the role of game developers is the role of craftsmen, right? And
Mm-hmm.
um, I think fundamentally, if like the game that you ship, even though it has great messages but is not able to execute on it, that is a poor work in and of itself. So if we go into it with these themes clearly in mind, right, and imbue the mechanics with them, and maybe the game itself, right, is not optimal for fun, right, but it's still engaging. I think we'll still achieve what we want to do. Yeah, I think these games are fun and people play them in different ways, but they can be about things, and I want them to be about things.
So do you think the game mechanics, assuming that you go forward and you make Thief and you make Monk, do you think the game mechanics will see a lot of changes?
Oh yeah, tons. The goal is to, so we're probably keeping for the next two games. We're still keeping the sort of front view battle scene that you, and that's mainly just due to resource costs. That's the cheapest kind of like way that we can set that up, and for it to not like completely take over our time. But the systems will be completely different. So, for example, you have a stance system here and you have weapon switching. For Monk, it'll be about comboing your moves, right? And to get your resources back. So instead of TP, you have key points, right? And so to get resources back, you have to give up something, right? And then you have to work towards sort of balancing it. And then Thief's going to be the most interesting because Thief is about not even doing combat. Rather, like combat is something you want to avoid, and you want to get into combat to steal stuff and then get out. And most of the things will be based around that. There's also going to be some fun luck manipulation stuff with Thief. And I hope that people see those and like they're like, yeah, this is exactly weird enough for me. I like it.
How far are you with Prime Maxima Warrior right now? Like if
Right. So I believe Warrior is at the sort of 80% mark. The reason I say it is so for the demo you only saw the first level. We have 3 other levels done and implemented out. Right. We just need to sort of up-res them. We developed them for a 4:3 aspect ratio, but we're looking to like. It turns out in RPG Maker, changing aspect ratios is a huge deal, and so we've been working with the new constraints that brings. So the goal is that over the course of November, we will up-res all those levels. They'll be in the sort of updated demo, and then December we'll complete the final level, and then that'll be a full sort of packaged game. And the goal is you play the game in about like 4 to 6 hours. We don't want this to be an 80-hour RPG. We want these to be short, focused, highly replayable experiences.
how are you gonna make them replayable experiences?
So one is just due to the sort of sheer depth of like the weapon and skill system, right? You can have a run where you're just doing sword and board, running around naked with an axe, right? Doing like double weapon combinations, things like that. But then we have achievements that are sort of tied to it. So you play through the entire game doing a certain condition, right? You'll be able to do a run of that sort, and we'll sort of reward you for it. You also get a sort of new game plus. So any of the stuff that you sort of unlocked over the course of a game will still be available to you when you play through it again. But we'll make certain elements of the enemies a little bit more difficult. And because you're doing specific runs. So for example, a run might be doing the lone wolf run, and so with New Game Plus, you can choose to never take on a buddy, and that already has some very interesting sort of implications. In that, like, oh, you can't take burst damage anymore because if you die, that's game over. Um, you can't just have your buddy like throw some assault on you, and then you wake up. Yeah. Yeah, so it's stuff like that that we are hoping to make it a little bit more replayable. Doing some fun like Undertale type stuff of like, oh, dialogue changing based on sort of how many runs you've done. We don't want to do like any like metasploit kind of shenanigans. But like one of the key things is that when you kill people, that's how you earn money, right? You can't play a pacifist run of the game, and that is a very different experience of the game. So if you notice that when you get enemies down to a certain amount of health, they will retreat. That is a completely valid way of playing the game, and we want that to be available to people because, not to spoil anything, the final boss you fight is dependent on how many people you've killed along the way. But yeah, that's the goal. Is that to me the best RPGs were the ones where like you could play the entire game and play the story and then go back and play it again, and even if you had heard the story, you still like playing the game. There's a ton of RPGs that I've done that with just because I enjoy how they play, and I hope that I can bring that to other people.
It's funny you say that when you say that's something that a lot of JRPGs have, is that I haven't actually played that many RPGs in my life, but this is probably... I've told this to you at the con. This is the first one where I was like excited to get into combat with enemies and stuff, because usually it feels like I'm just repeatedly pressing one button. But then with this one, it's like, oh wait, I gotta switch my weapon. Oh, it's an overhead shot this time. Oh wait, when should I use potion? You know, something kind of like that. So that's good.
Yeah, and that comes down to numbers and tuning, right? The funny thing is that you would think I spend all my day looking at code. I don't. That's Isaiah's job. I spend all my day looking at spreadsheets.
God.
Yeah.
What?
And so...
What life do you live?
Spreadsheets are fascinating, let me tell you. But the main thing is that one of the reasons I think JRPGs have sort of fallen off, and I've studied a bunch of this, so going from the PSG to sort of PS3 era, and I don't want to like create that golden age myth, because I don't think that's necessarily real. I just think that like a lot of things happen at the right time, which is why we remember the sort of Super Nintendo and PS1 JRPGs really fondly. So one of the things is that like where the budget went, right? And earlier on, because even though like these were still very graphics intensive games, right, time and design energy could be spent on its systems and things, because that is what's keeping you playing the game, not necessarily like how pretty it looks, right? But as time went on, how pretty it looks became a big factor, and other things sadly sort of fell by the wayside. And I think that sort of with the sort of indie resurgence, it is possible to develop on the stuff that made these games work back in the day, right? Without spending a lot of money on like graphics and like animations and budget and things like that. So when you say that like these kinds of games usually didn't engage you, right? Like to me that makes sense, because a lot of these games have not been, designed all that well. And this is not me like throwing shade at the designers. This is me saying that this is a consequence of how game development is now. in how it is not letting a certain genre have the resources it needs to succeed.
So that's cool. Are there any JRPGs in particular that you think influenced this game?
Yeah, so Final Fantasy 1 through 3 heavily influenced it because those games barely had a story. They were entirely systems kind of based games. Um, I would definitely say Dark Souls influenced the game, but in that, like, I was just like, oh, yeah, I don't want to do that. um, a lot of the sort of early combat stuff is and switching between the weapons, right? That was a very key Dark Souls influence thing because you can sort of have two weapons on a slot and then switch between them, and there's different reasons to want to switch kind of between them. And so seeing how that changed the gameplay in that game sort of influenced heavily how gameplay changes in this game. um what other stuff? Drakengard, I think, is a big influence because Drakengard was made by people that didn't want to make a violent game, and it is the best protest game I've ever played. The OST screams at you for playing the game.
I've never heard of this game before. Dragon Guard?
It's called Drakengard. It's done by Yoko Taro's team, who did Nier and Nier Automata.
Oh.
Yeah, it was like one of the first ones. I think it was back when he was with Kavia. It's a like so mechanics wise, it's not bad, right? It's like a 3D brawler. You run around with different weapons and kill people Dynasty Warrior style. And you have a dragon, and you can ride the dragon, and then there's sort of like aerial dragon sequences. But the story is pitch black. Like, it is clearly written by people that are like, you know, the thing that video game protagonists do where they kill millions of people? Yeah, none of these characters are good people.
Yeah, I'm looking.
Yes.
I'm looking at the cover right now. Angsty Boy does not look happy with you.
Yeah, and also there's an extremely good reason why Angsty Boy. So you know how JRPGs do the silent protagonist. There's a good in-lore reason why, because you don't want to like hear him when he speaks. He's a bad boy. So he's mute because he had to, in order to bond with the dragon, he had to give up his voice, right?
Oh.
But like everything else is just sort of like action with him. Yeah, there's some really dark stuff with that game. I won't get into it because like it's like you don't have to play through the game because playing through the game is a slog. Just look up the endings for this game. Like every single one of them is like something out of a nightmare.
Oh my god.
But yeah, that was a big influence as well. Because essentially, like it's a game that is protesting against the sort of form of the game. But yeah, I would say those are probably the three biggest influences for this one, and then for the future games, there are other influences that I'm pulling from.
So we can expect this game by like, I'm guessing like end of December, something like that.
Yeah, end of December. I don't want it to go into January, but it might. I really, since this is the first game that I'm putting out as Myth Atelier, I want this to go out as a pretty packaged, good quality product. Like something that has a lot of the bugs and stuff figured out. Because I don't know if you noticed, but there were a couple bugs in your playthrough, and like I saw them, and I'm like, God damn it! But yeah, it'll be out in December. If you enjoyed what you saw, Carson will be getting a free copy of the game. Again, disclosure, I know Carson. Carson is a personal friend. Like, there's no secret dealings going on here. But yeah, you get a full copy of the game. If you want to do a playthrough of it, by all means, go ahead. If you want to like give it to somebody else, that also works as well. We hope people enjoy this game, this sort of game. And if you support it, I'll be in a better position to make more games like this. If not, I will be basically halving my paycheck every month of my life to see that these games are made.
Oh no! No! Go support this poor boy, please.
Yeah. But I also want to say that, and I know not too many people are on stream now. So when I grew up with games, right, like I didn't have like consoles and things like that. I had emulators and ROMs, and that's because one, they were not available where I was, but two, because I was poor, right? So I don't want. So if you see the price tag of the game and it's going to be $4.99, right, and that is too much for you right now, I give you my blessing. It is okay to pirate my game, right? Yeah, I've long been pretty pro, like, hey, if you don't have the resources right now, you shouldn't be denied knowledge and enjoyment that you need, right? And so if you need a free copy of the game, feel free to message me. If you feel like BitTorrent, well, you can do that as well. But I think that's not nearly as popular nowadays. I think people have moved on to another type of source.
I like to. I'd like to think that you waited until there was only one viewer, and that viewer was you before you said that.
No, so like when the game comes out, we'll make that announcement on Twitter as well. Just making it clear that like the problem I see with this hobby is that like the base unit cost is $60, and then you pay more for stuff. And sure, you should pay for a product, but I don't think you should pay to keep paying, because there's a lot of people right now that can't afford that. And I still think they deserve the enjoyment that games give them.
Please,
Yeah.
please, if you have the money, go support this poor foolish boy who actually thinks that sometimes people don't have to give money to feel happy. Like, what? I don't know what this is.
Yeah, like
Capitalism didn't teach me this.
yeah, the sad part is that a lot of our fandom, right, of video games and things is tied towards merchandise, right? And there's almost an implicit, you are the best fan if you have dedicated a lot of time and money to it. And I don't think that's true at all. I think that people that spend 5 minutes a day playing games or spend 3 hours playing games can be on even footing. Yeah, you should love doing the things that cause you joy, unless it's killing people, in which case I have a couple questions. Right.
Like, you're not judging, just you have some questions.
I have some very pointed questions about that. Right. But yeah, video games should be for everyone, right? And yeah, we'll try to make the game as accessible to folks as possible, as monetary possible on our side, once it comes out. So if there are any languages you're interested in seeing the game or any accessibility features, please let me know. And we'll
Okay, awesome.
Time to alienate the other person on stream.
What other person? You've just been talking to yourself this whole time. There's no stream.
Oh my, this was a delusion. Ah.
No, that's how you do a plot twist, Shyamalan.